She had been dead for over 3 days. I leaned my head against the closed window of the taxi on our journey to New Delhi Airport and imagined the team of policemen and investigative reporters all combing the beach looking for clues. Ralph and I were silent in the air-conditioned car, but I was highly aware of our anxieties, pleading us to get out of India before any part of our trip resurfaced. The idea was a modest one and could have worked well given the parameters. A foreign traveler out of her element, drowning in a too-strong current out at sea. A very simple tale, no more, no less. It could have been left at that. But the tide wasn't that strong, and her body was found quickly. So quickly that the marks around her neck had still been visible. It was difficult to imagine hands strong enough to complete the plan. But maybe if they were guided by jealousy, by greed, it would have been possible. This would not be the first death to fill my days with intense migraines, my sleepless nights with terrible dread, but the second. I remember the planning stage of our India trip well, in particular, the day I learned about Deepak and Ronnie. The air temperature was warm, but the wind coming off the sea was chilly, so I stayed in and around the less exposed shopping lanes of Brighton. I had combed through a number of travel guides over the previous months, but it wasn't until the day that I came upon a hidden independent bookshop when my trip really began to take shape. Brighton Beach is an expanse of blue-gray, tan, orange, and white pebbles. As an American, with 25 summers' experience swimming in the Atlantic, I find the English Channel absolutely freezing all year round. It's also incredibly uncomfortable to lie on the beach, which is why I don't. But I guess you could say it's a pastime for the local community, as well as those from further afield, to enjoy the Brighton seafront. I simply need to live in a city by the water. But sometimes I wonder if I've punished myself by living here. It's almost always damp, and when it rains, I feel all my old wounds opening up again. On the rare clearer days, I stand out on the balcony of our mustard-colored Regency home and feel the sun upon my face. The warmth encourages me to run into the water, but I feel I'm a prisoner here. I know my bare feet will never be able to handle the painful walk across the stones. I'm stuck on dry land, being teased by the sea. I often skulk around Brighton, rummaging through bookshops or boutiques, not wanting to communicate. I enjoy being alone, and I feel solitude here, even though it's a vibrant place. Maybe it's my ability to shut everyone out, or my capability of becoming invisible when necessary. The hidden bookshop was small. At first I didn't even notice it and walked right by. But then I caught a whiff of freshly baked chocolate cake, so I stopped, swung round quickly, and tracked the aroma like a bloodhound hunting its quarry. I licked my chocolate-covered fingers and searched the travel section. Amongst some books on India, I discovered a thin paperback about a couple, Deepak and Ronnie, who ran a guest house in Delhi. Instead of buying the book, I wrote their information down on a napkin that was crumpled in my jacket pocket. Ralph wasn't stingy with money, but he did have an opinion about buying a book when it could be taken out of the library. As I've never learned to drive in Britain, he also prefers me to take the bus to town, as opposed to catching a taxi. Ralph is concerned about the environment and, in particular, wasting petrol. I eventually came to understand that there were rules, and even when he wasn't around, I didn't go sneaking off in taxis with new hardcovers from Waterstones. Ralph had said years before that he wanted to show me what had influenced him along his career path and how India had been the catalyst. I was eager to please my husband, and so I set out to organize an intellectually stimulating and gastronomically adventurous 2-month trip. We planned on flying from London to Delhi, then taking trains to Mumbai and then Goa, before heading back to Delhi via the Taj Mahal. I phoned the guest house and spoke to Deepak. He was happy to put us up for a few nights in October and said his wife would provide vegetarian dinners. It all sounded straightforward, and we exchanged email addresses in order to work out the logistics. We had to organize our pickup at the airport, as well as the delivery of the train tickets to see the Taj Mahal. Eventually, it had been confirmed by Ronnie that she would hold them on our behalf. The only place I'd booked to stay in advance was in Delhi. Other than that, we were going to go with the flow, which I felt particularly nervous about. But Ralph told me he still knew people in Goa and remembered all the best beach shacks for the sampling of local food, and I was used to relying on him for most things. Deepak was a tubby little middle-aged man, dressed Western style with grey trousers and a non-remarkable white short-sleeved shirt. There was a confidence about him that made him stand out amongst all the people waving their signs in arrivals. When we approached, he was friendly and inviting and spoke perfect English. "Good afternoon. I trust your flight was good. Did they feed you? Did you sleep?" He spoke through a constant smile with more energy than I expected. During the drive from the airport, we learned that he had been to school in England. "I have visited Cambridge. We played some cricket there. It was good fun, but it rained a lot, so we had a lot more tea breaks than I was used to, being from Delhi." He sat in the front passenger seat and aimed his speech back to us as one of his boys, who was a full-grown man, drove. "I love England and will go back one day, but I'm first and foremost an Indian. Oh, look over there!" He would make an occasional break in his monologue to point out an ornate gold and red Hindu temple, a goat sitting in the middle of the street, or a vendor selling yellow, red, and orange tomatoes alongside bright green beans. Then he would go on to enlighten us about all the various produce we would be able to see, eager to share information about India with us. I tried to listen as he went on to describe his life as a guest house owner, the geography of New Delhi, and how that related to Old Delhi, but it was awfully hard for me to concentrate. I realize I've had a culturally isolated upbringing, being exposed to pretty much only white Christian people in our affluent town in the northeast of the United States. Deepak's voice became background noise, and I was totally transfixed by the view out my window. In particular, cows roaming freely through the streets. We stopped in the traffic and were able to see the skeletal cows closely. With pus dripping from their open sores, they looked like the Indian version of vermin. A wave of heat carrying their horrific scent came through the window so strongly that I thought I might just heave down the back of Deepak's balding head. I wondered if the freedom for such a sacred animal was actually a good thing. Without restraint, the cows could venture wherever they pleased. Through the course of our Indian journey, we would see cows allowed anywhere and everywhere, from the beach to the grounds of an abandoned parking lot covered in years of rubbish. I was removed from the conversation in the car and started to think about my ongoing battle regarding eating meat. Surely these animals couldn't fend for themselves. But on the other hand, were human beings going to spend their entire lives looking after animals from which they would not be able to directly benefit? Ralph, on the other hand, looked relaxed. He reached across the seat and squeezed my hand, showing he understood that I was uncomfortable. Ralph knows me well, but it's not because we think along the same lines. He's pragmatic, logical, and mechanical. It makes sense that he's a doctor. Lines blur for me, but with Ralph it's obvious where these lines separate. He very strongly ticked the non-veg box for his meat when we booked the train tickets to Agra. Humans eat meat. This is the circle of life, he says. Although we don't always agree, and I often hesitate, Ralph has the morals that I aspire to. Sometimes when I'm wavering about my stance on a particular subject, all he needs to do is make a single remark in order to convince me to agree with him. Ralph is not a man of many words, but there is value in everything he says. Luckily, I was able to return to the conversation without becoming physically ill from seeing the sickly cows. Deepak was telling Ralph about a walking tour in Delhi. I finally contributed. "I read that you start each morning by teaching the house guests yoga." "Yes, sometimes," he said. "What about Reiki? I also read that your wife is a teacher." "Yes," he replied, "she is a Reiki master." I didn't understand much about Reiki. During my research for the trip, I had read online that it was a mental massage, but had no idea what that meant. I was thinking about exploring the subject more during our trip. The remainder of the drive through Delhi was a chaotic one. There were monkeys along with cows in the streets, begging children dressed in rags weaving in amongst the traffic, barefoot women in saris selling pineapples to the people in stopped cars. When we finally turned down a quiet suburban street and pulled into the front driveway of Deepak's home, I felt a sense of relief. The house was tall and boxy, with various sized balconies jutting out from every floor. From each level, a profusion of plants and colorful flowers hung down, with the sun reflecting off them. The property looked almost alive. I stepped out of the Honda Civic and shaded my eyes. I looked up at the house. An exceptionally beautiful woman leaned out from one of the windows, shouted something down to Deepak, and slammed the windows shut. Several other windows were being closed in rapid succession, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw Deepak dash into the house. "What did she say?" I asked the driver. "Monkey." He looked unfazed. "What does that mean?" "It means there is a monkey in the house." His English was heavily accented and he spoke quietly, but I understood him. "It is very dangerous. A monkey in your house is not a good thing. They want your food and can be aggressive about it, especially towards the children." Ralph had come round from the other side of the car and was standing next to me. I looked at him and asked, "They have children?" I hadn't read that in the guidebook. It made me feel uneasy that they had strange people coming and going amongst their own children. The driver lifted our bags from the trunk. "They have 2 children, 1 boy and 1 girl. He brought our things to the front door and gestured for us to follow. We tiptoed into the house, taking our cue from the driver. We followed him through the wide hallway, which opened up into a large lounge. He indicated that we should sit down on one of the peach sofas in the middle of the room, leaving us with our things. "What do we do now?" I whispered to Ralph. "We wait here," he whispered back, always more patient than me. Slumped over in the heat, I noticed a bookshelf holding about 100 tattered paperbacks. Various paintings with Hindu themes hung on the wood-paneled walls, making the room appear dark. The huge windows were closed. I tried to relax, but felt sticky from the humidity and lack of airflow. While trying to get comfortable, I spotted a painting of a man who I could only describe as India's answer to Jesus. He was a young Indian man with shoulder-length black hair. He looked to be in his 20s, youthful but not innocent. His eyes were painted in a way to convey that he possessed great knowledge. A light like that of a halo surrounded his head. "Babaji." "Pardon?" I said to the man who walked into the room. I felt as though he was speaking to me. He strolled towards the picture, standing next to it so he didn't block our view. "It's Babaji you're looking at, Ronnie and Deepak's guru." He chuckled to himself. "Well, maybe Ronnie's guru. Do you want to come and see my photos while they're getting the monkey out of the kitchen?" "It would be a pleasure," Ralph answered. As we turned to follow him, the beautiful Indian woman I had seen earlier walked into the room. "Ralph? Katherine?" Her waist-length blue-black hair swung behind her as she looked from Ralph to me. "Hi," I said. She forced a smile from me. Even if I had tried to contain my enthusiasm, which I often do, it wouldn't have happened. Her positive energy sprang forth from her and transferred directly into me. "I see you've met David," she said. "The pictures," he said to her, as though she knew to what he was referring. "I'm sorry, but I think those will have to wait. I've come to get Ralph and Katherine settled. Let me show them to the room and get them comfortable." "No problem," David said. "I've got plenty of time to show them later." Ralph nodded his head. "Nice to meet you." "Thank you for being patient," the woman said, as she turned and led us down the hallway, expecting us to follow. "That monkey..." Deepak lured it away with a banana and a broom. "It doesn't happen often, but when it does, he is a system that seems to work. I'm Ronnie." We came to a white wooden door adjacent to the living room and walked up a narrow spiral staircase, climbing the 3 steep flights in silence. When we got to the top, Ronnie lifted a square door, pushing it out over her head. We stepped out onto a flat roof. It was a large communal space with a wrought iron table and chairs and potted plants amongst the flowers. There were also 2 rooms that could be entered from this level. It was as if they had built them a long time after the main portion of the house was erected, like 2 boxes that had been plonked down without any forethought as to where they should go. Ronnie opened the door to one of the rooms and held it for us. "I hope you don't mind staying up here," she said as we entered. "We have so many guests in October and November." "This is nice," I said. "Well, it can get like a greenhouse in here," she said, then pointed to a small white box on the wall. The 2 rooms up here are the only ones with air conditioning. Use it sparingly, please. Of course, Ralph said. I want to tell you about a few things to help you get settled. Why don't we sit outside? I listened carefully throughout the orientation. I began to understand that Ronnie was here to assist us in our exploration of Delhi. She was clear as to what her role was and highly professional. I was in awe of her confidence and wanted to learn more about her. It took me a few minutes to get the courage to take an active part in the conversation. What's Reiki? Ronnie took a slow breath and stared into my eyes, which gave me the impression that the subject of Reiki was very serious. The definition of Reiki is far different than the experience. It's unique to each individual. She leaned in towards me. I think you should experience Reiki. I looked at Ralph. He didn't give me any hint as to what he was thinking. I was going to have to make this decision on my own. Okay, well, how do we go about this? Let me get the room prepared. Why don't you both relax and I'll come back for you? She moved away from the table, her long hair swinging behind her as she headed for the other room on top of the flat roof. Well, let's let those clothes breathe, Ralph said. He pushed his chair back and I understood we were to start unpacking. Thank you.